My fear turned into courage, and I told myself that I am a fighter. I will succeed. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Shinma Investigation Office. I am Shinma. Today we are going to tell the story of a 9-year-old girl who, after being kidnapped, cleverly fought against her kidnappers and eventually got them sent to prison. Unlike some cases we have told before, this story has a very heartwarming ending that invites reflection. The story takes place on the 8th of June, 2003, in San Jose, California. Janet Tamayo, 9 years old, after school, was taking the school bus to go home. When she arrived at her front door, she found that the outer door was locked. At that moment, she didn't think much of it, believing her mother had come home early from work. But when she entered the house, she realized there was no one inside. Then she went upstairs to the second floor bedroom and saw that a window was broken with glass scattered on the floor. That's when she realized something was wrong. So she picked up the phone, intending to call her mother. But when she lifted the receiver, she didn't hear a dial tone. Looking more closely, she saw the phone line had been cut. While still wondering what was going on, she heard knocking at the door. Janet approached the door and saw a stranger outside. Although she was a bit confused, Janet opened the door. The man spoke to Janet while suspiciously looking inside the house. Janet felt the man had bad intentions, so she tried to close the door again. But the man pushed the door with his hand and forced his way in. After entering, the man dragged Janet into a bedroom and sexually assaulted her. Afterwards, the man held Janet's hands, tied her feet with a rope, and took her to the garage to try to escape in the car. Just as the man was opening the garage door, a car was already parked outside. It turned out Janet's mother and brother had returned. But obviously, they didn't know what had happened inside the house. Janet's brother Paul, unaware of anything, entered the garage, and Janet saw him from the back seat and shouted loudly, "Paul, run." But at that moment, the kidnapper had already gotten out of the car and was heading toward Paul. Paul saw the stranger in the house and his sister locked in the car and immediately understood what was happening. Although he was only 15 years old at the time, he didn't hesitate to grab a screwdriver and lunged to stab the man. But due to the huge difference in strength between them, the imbalance was overwhelming. The man quickly snatched the screwdriver from Paul and knocked him to the ground. Then the man started beating him relentlessly, repeatedly hitting Paul's face, until he completely lost the ability to fight back. Then the man dragged Paul inside the house just as he encountered Janet's mother, Rosalia. Seeing a strange man dragging her son, she immediately jumped in to separate them. But after letting go of Paul, the man attacked Rosalia. Paul ran to the kitchen after being born, grabbed a frying pan, and kept fighting the man. This probably raises a question. Surely there were knives in the kitchen, so why didn't Paul take a knife but a frying pan instead? I had that question at first too. But then I thought, if the strength difference is too big, in the end, the knife could hurt yourself. Judging by the outcome, Paul should be thankful he didn't take a knife because between him and Rosalia together, they were no match for the man and were soon subdued again. Janet, who was inside the car, stopped moving after hearing her mother's heart-wrenching scream from the house. Hearing the scream, she fell silent. Then the man returned to the garage. Janet saw that the man was covered in blood. Then, with a trembling voice, she asked him if he had killed her brother and mother. But the man just laughed coldly without answering and directly started the car, taking Janet with him. Janet thought her mother and brother had died and began to cry inconsolably. But luckily, the car didn't go far, and she saw her mother and ran out of the house. Although her face was covered in wounds, her mother was still desperately running after the car. Soon, her brother Paul also came out limping, waving his arms, screaming at the top of her lungs for someone to call the police. Seeing that her family was alive, Janet managed to calm down a bit and began to think about how to save herself. She saw other vehicles passing by on the street, so Janet started screaming desperately and struck the car window with her body, hoping to get their attention. But this tactic didn't work, and instead it angered the man. He used a screwdriver he had taken from Paul earlier. and stabbed her repeatedly with force, warning her to be quiet. After being stabbed, Janet no longer dared to scream, lying in the back seat, staring desperately at the car ceiling with only one thought in her mind: I'm about to die. I'm about to die. Just thinking to myself that I won't survive. I'm going to die. Meanwhile, the police, alerted, arrived at the scene. They also went to Janet's house. Rosalia was seriously injured, but she refused to go to the hospital, repeatedly insisting that the police rescue her daughter. The police had to work hard to convince Rosalia to get into the ambulance, and they took her along with Paul to the nearest hospital for emergency care, for emergency treatment. Then the police began the investigation. The officer in charge of the case is named Sutherland. Upon arriving at the crime scene, he found many blood stains. So first, he tried to have the tracking dogs follow the blood trail to locate the suspect, but unfortunately, the blood inside the house, it belonged to Rosalia and Paul, the kidnappers, and Janet was not injured, so they left no blood traces. So this method didn't work. While continuing the inspection, he noticed that in a house across the street there were surveillance cameras installed, so he went to that house, hoping they would provide the recording. Later, he obtained the recordings without any problem, and it was thanks to those recordings that the police were able to reconstruct the kidnapper's timeline. It turned out that 30 minutes before Janet arrived home, the kidnappers had already arrived at her house. First, they broke the window of Janet's bedroom and entered through there, probably with the intention to steal. But after stealing, they didn't leave. Instead, they went back to the car to wait. When they saw Janet arrive home, they followed her and knocked on the door. Then, the man entered the house and abused Janet for 30 minutes. Just as he was trying to leave with Janet, Paul and Rosalia returned home. At the end of the recording, their screams and cries for help can still be clearly heard. In the United States, there is an alert system for missing children called Amber Alert, which is a rapid response mechanism specifically for cases of child abduction. This system is named after a famous case of child abduction and murder that happened in Texas in 1996. It was named in honor of that case. That's how it got its name. For those interested in these cases, you can leave a comment to let me know. In the future, if there's an opportunity, we can dedicate an entire episode to talking about this famous case. In the United States, when a child is kidnapped, the government issues an Amber Alert requesting useful tips from the entire community. But to activate the Amber Alert, certain conditions must be met, such as having a detailed description of the kidnapper or their identity information, as well as the specific model of the vehicle, the license plate, etc. In this case, the surveillance footage was too blurry, so no useful clues could be extracted, and that wasn't enough to trigger the Amber Alert. This left Officer Reynard very frustrated, but he still made a very wise decision, which was to inform the media about the case as soon as possible, hoping to mobilize the community to help find Janet. During that time, the news repeatedly shared information about Janet's case, and the streets were filled with pictures of Janet. The police even sent helicopters, which continuously broadcast Janet's name, making sure the local people knew all about it, the case, and the basic information of the kidnapped girl. Now let's turn our attention back to Janet. When Janet was sitting in the back seat of the car, although she was very scared, she tried hard to remember the route the vehicle was taking, hoping that if she ever escaped, she would find her way back home. However, the car didn't take long to reach its destination. The man drove the car to the garage of a white house, then opened the back door and took Janet inside. He locked her up in a small room on the second floor, which only had a bed, a television, and a bathroom. In the following days, Janet lived with that man in that small room. Every time the man abused Janet, he made her lean on the bathroom faucet so she could clean herself, which is an extremely perverse behavior. The day after the incident, the man was watching television in his room when Janet suddenly saw her cousin appear on the screen, speaking directly to her. It turns out that because Janet's mother and brother were still hospitalized, the police arranged for a family member to deliver a message on television. Her cousin said on television, Janet. We are doing everything we can to find you. If you can hear us, stay strong and don't give up. Stay strong, don't give up. We will get you out of there." The breath of her loved ones gave Janet the will to fight back. "Give me hope, that gives me strength too. I will fight to get out of here," or D, trying. So she began planning how to escape. She knew that to get out, she first had to earn the kidnappers' trust. So she tried to communicate with them. She carefully asked, "Where are you from?" Obviously, the kidnappers did not expect that this 9-year-old girl would be the first to break the ice. The kidnappers were surprised, but then they laughed. It was the first time Janet saw the kidnappers smile, and she knew her plan was working. So she planned to take advantage when Sheng chased him, to ask if she could have a glass of water. The kidnappers agreed, but before going down the stairs, they handcuffed Janet. After the kidnappers left, Janet immediately started to manipulate the handcuffs. She discovered they were mechanical handcuffs that didn't need a key. You just had to press a button on the cuffs and they would open. So, after opening the handcuffs, she gained a brief moment of freedom. At that moment, Janet started thinking quickly. She knew the kidnappers would return soon, and she had to make good use of that time. Then, she remembered an investigative show she often watched where the police, when dealing with sexual assault cases, collected the victim's underwear as evidence. So she went into the bathroom, took some panties she had worn, then took a watch that the kidnappers had left by the bed, and also some small toys they had given her before, and hid all of that in her clothes without it being noticed. Just as she finished, she heard the kidnappers' footsteps coming up the stairs, so Janet immediately lay down on the bed and put the handcuffs back on. When the kidnappers entered, Janet sat on the bed as if nothing had happened, but inside she was very restless because everything she had collected before was on her person. Luckily, the kidnappers didn't touch her that day. 3 days passed. Despite Officer Randall's great effort, the police still had no leads. The critical time to rescue a kidnapped child is 48 hours. It's 48 hours, and if that time passes, the chances of finding them drop significantly. That's why the police told Rosalia to prepare for the worst. But Rosalia refused to accept the reality. "My daughter is a little girl. She is a little girl. I asked the universe what happened to my daughter when she could buy, says maybe never. I don't feel comfortable because I don't feel her." Meanwhile, Janet was also fighting to survive. She endured the kidnappers' daily beatings and abuse, showing absolute obedience to lower the kidnappers' guard. Her strategy began to work little by little. One night, the kidnappers asked Janet if she wanted to order a pizza. Janet nodded immediately. Then the kidnappers gave her the phone so she could make the call herself. So Janet called the pizzeria because she was going to order takeout and needed to leave a phone number and address. So the kidnapper gave Janet his cell phone number and the address. And smart Janet secretly wrote everything down. She thought that if she ever managed to escape, she would definitely put that guy in jail. Remember, she was only 9 years old at that time. It took a lot of calm and great inner strength to accomplish that. In any case, I definitely couldn't have done it. After a while, the doorbell rang. It was probably the pizza delivery. Then the kidnapper went downstairs to open the door. But when he came back, he had a strange expression on his face. He threw the pizza onto the bed, and Janet saw there was a flyer inside the box. It was a missing person poster for herself. It turned out the delivery guy, while delivering the pizza, was also handing out flyers searching for Janet. This made the kidnapper very nervous, and Janet thought, "Looks like today I have to get rid of you." Then she turned around and left the room. But Janet thought, even if I die, I have to leave some clues. So she threw the pizza away and put all the evidence she could find inside the pizza box, then hid the box under the bed. Not long after, the man came back carrying a pillow in his hand and then used the pillow to cover Janet's head, intending to suffocate her. Janet struggled with all her strength, trying to turn her head to the side, but the man was very strong. Just as she was about to suffocate, she managed to turn her head to the side and took a deep breath. At that moment, the man suddenly released the pillow. Just 5 seconds later, after taking in some air, he took off the pillow and asked me if I wanted to take a shower. Then, Janet took a quick shower. While getting dressed, she hid the evidence she had collected in her pocket. Then, the man took Janet to the car. It was already night, and there wasn't much traffic on the street. Janet knew she probably wouldn't survive that night. She was very scared, but she hadn't lost all hope yet. And she kept trying, remembering every intersection and turn the car passed. But this trip was much longer than the first. They drove for about 30 minutes. Then the kidnapper drove the car into a parking lot. When the man stopped the car, he grabbed Janet by the hair and pulled her out of the vehicle. It is unknown if it was because Janet had always been submissive and that earned the kidnapper's trust, or because he finally didn't dare to kill her. He told Janet, "You can go, but if you dare tell anyone anything about me, I will come back and kill you, and then kill your family." After saying those harsh words, the kidnapper drove away, leaving Janet alone and helpless. She couldn't believe she had escaped alive. Janet saw a nearby store and ran to it immediately. The owner was a middle-aged man, and upon seeing her, recognized Janet instantly. She was the kidnapped girl on the television. She asked if she could use the phone. Actually, "Sure, here's the phone." And when she started dialing, she was Telekin Scash with close to a dollar member. Finally, Janet called the police herself. The police received the call and immediately notified Officer Randall, who quickly arrived at the store and finally saw Janet with his own eyes. At that moment, he felt euphoric. But Randall also knew that to catch the criminal, they had to act fast. They needed Janet's help for that. While I was thinking about how to ask, Janet spoke first. "Officer, I have some evidence with me." Then she took out underwear from her pocket, a toy, and the kidnapper's watch. Randall was impressed by Janet's calmness and intelligence. Then he asked her, "What else do you know about the kidnapper?" Janet asked for paper and pencil, drew the layout of the kidnapper's house, wrote part of the address, and his full phone number. Seeing how smart Janet was, Randall asked cautiously, "Do you think you can find his house?" Janet answered confidently, "I think so." Then the police put Janet in the patrol car, and they returned to the city of St. Hersey. Thanks to her strong memory, Janet truly guided the police to the kidnapper's house. At that moment, she became her own hero. "I felt brave. I think that's why I stood up in the back of the car and started shouting that was all." Randall quickly deployed the SWAT team, and Janet even drew the layout of the house interior for the police. The capture operation was very successful. The suspect's name was David Montiel Cruz. When the police entered the house, he was hiding in the attic, trying to escape. Finally, the police released the dogs that subdued him. Inside the house, Randall also found the pizza box that Janet had hidden under the bed, full of crime evidence. In the end, David was charged with burglary, sexual assault, and rape, forced abuse, assault, and 9 other serious felonies. Janet was sent to the hospital for treatment, where she reunited with her family. But in the years that followed, Janet developed severe post-traumatic stress disorder, that is, post-traumatic stress disorder. She didn't dare to leave the house. She was afraid to interact with strangers. And after 6 years of psychological therapy, she learned to face her inner fears. And little by little, she returned to a normal life. 12 years later, through the efforts of a television producer, Janet met Tayuan Randall. After 12 years, they embraced again. Randall, years later, still admired Janet's courage and intelligence. And Janet was sincerely grateful for everything Randall had done for her. Finally, this young woman managed to completely overcome the fears of her childhood. She decided to follow Randall's footsteps, becoming a detective to help those who suffer persecution, just as Randall had helped her in the past. Maybe this is what everyone calls, "When you were a child, you were my hero, and growing up, I became you."